Welcome to Redefining Engagement. I'm Francesca Duma, Director of Audience Development and Strategy at Contribui. And in this show, I speak to leaders and innovators in the media industry so that we can bring tips, wisdom, ideas, and even some things to avoid so that we can all do more engagement better. So without further ado, let's move on to our next guest. So, Rachel, would you mind just starting off by giving us a little bit of an intro, please?
No problem at all. So I'm Rachel Middlewick and I'm the founder of the Positive Consultancy. And what I've been doing over the last couple of years is working with a variety of media businesses and events businesses in particular, who need support around growth and transformation. And so specifically, my background has been in running media brands, running portfolios. And also I've had a stint as chief commercial officer. So my thoughts around audience engagement really relate much more to the commercial side of audience engagement than probably to a lot of the people that you speak to on the editorial side of the business. So I guess, from my perspective, audience engagement can mean a variety of different things, depending on whether it's a B2B audience or a B2C audience or a B2B2C audience. And I think, for me, audience engagement is really related to where you are within that customer relationship and that customer journey. So it can range from awareness and just attracting more people to your brand at the beginning, through to how you talk to people when you're in a relationship with them, whether that's an audience relationship or whether that's a paying commercial relationship, right through to then how you retain that customer and how you keep them plugged into the brand. So I would look at it from the business perspective of both sides of those coins, about audience and then also commercial, both of which are obviously equally important.
I love that definition. I think obviously your variety of experience really adds to that. What's really interesting is looking at what engagement means within media and for the different roles. How has your definition or approach to audience engagement evolved at all in the past few years?
I think enormously. We've just become so much more sophisticated about how we think and how we track and how we measure audience engagement. I think that only probably 5 years ago, we weren't really considering what a proper customer journey looked like, whether it was on the commercial side or whether it was on the audience side. And of the businesses that I've been working with over the last 2, 3 years, all of them have had an absolutely enormous requirement for me to analyze exactly what that customer journey is. So, right from the beginning of you engaging with that brand, how do you continue to create and improve that engagement? And how do you continue to increase the way and that they perceive your brand to be? And I think then there's also all of the different methodologies around which we would capture that data and analyze that data and react to that data. So I think how it's changed has fundamentally been from one that's an assumption and is really tracked by very, very raw, hard metrics that are very top level, to ones that are fundamentally much more nuanced, that you can go into, dig into, understand and react much more to.
It's really interesting seeing it from the user point of view and measuring that user point of view. But I guess part of the question is what would you say the aims that audience engagement, the strategy is kind of meeting? Why should we be doing audience engagement? What's the point of it?
Okay, so there's so many answers there's so many answers to this question. And ultimately, we obviously all want to drive revenue, right? Because ultimately, audience engagement, whether you're looking at it from an audience perspective or a commercial audience perspective, is the fuel to any business. So there's no question that everything ladders up into a top line revenue metric. That's what all audience engagement is really setting out to achieve. However, there's so many more nuances underneath that are facing the customer in this day and age. So I think there was the Edelman Trust Barometer, which was recently carried out, I think in 2024. showed that something like 61% of business leaders aren't trusted. And yet, as a metric for where customers decide to spend their money, it's such an enormous factor. So that brand equity and that brand perception has got to be of such good quality that I think that where audience engagement for me has become an absolutely enormous focus is because it's become less about quality. I think that's the other sort of thing that I would say where the evolution has been is that previously audience engagement metrics were always about reach, they were always about volume, and it was always we were trading off the more the merrier basically. And I think that what we really do understand these days, in a world where the customer has got so many different brands all vying for attention and so many different platforms upon which they can consume content and buy from certain brands, it's not quantity anymore, but it's the quality. And so I think that those metrics that we always want to measure are actually much more subtle, much more nuanced, and much more complex than perhaps they were in the past. So ultimately, what I'm saying is that whilst audience engagement ultimately leads to top line success, top line revenues, business success, and business growth, you really do have to ladder that down into a very clear idea about what all of those different elements are that are actually going to turn into that, that success at the top level.
That's so interesting. So what would you say we're measuring when you say quality? Like what would you say that is? What's that measurement?
Let me give an example of working with a B2B publisher who was struggling with top line revenue. And the reason that they were struggling with top line revenue was because they were basically trading on reach. And so this blunt metric around how many people are you reaching, what's the CPM upon which I can charge, just simply wasn't working because people were asking for data proof points that weren't easy to extrapolate from the data. And then they were arguing on the wrong metrics. And so I worked with this particular B2B publisher to undertake a research project, which I carried out on both sides of the buying exchange. And so this was basically with retail buyers on one side and FMCG brand owners on the other side. And the media brand was the crossover in the middle. And in carrying out this research, I basically asked a load of questions about what exactly it was that the buyers wanted from the brands, how they used it, how they perceived it, and what the real messages they were that they wanted to get from the FMCG brands were from the media brand. And then on the FMCG brand side, I was asking them around, how they chose where to spend their money, what impact they wanted to have, and what good looked like to them. And it basically turned out that, this brand had such an enormous perceived quality, heritage, and stature within the buyers community. And the top line engagement stats, audience engagement stats that they were sharing didn't even cover half the picture, because actually the content was being used so fundamentally within conversations that were being had internally. They were being shared on Slack and lots of different ways that weren't necessarily being picked up. And then on the FMCG brand side, and the other thing that was absolutely fundamental was that we found out that the messaging that they were getting from the brands just wasn't quite right. They were basically being talked to as if they were marketeers, when in actual fact they wanted to get a really particular type of message in a really particular kind of way, because these people aren't marketeers. They're not interested in brand stories. What they wanted to hear was real logistical facts that they could then use in the decision making within their organization. And so what that enabled to, that very long story, what that enabled us to find was that in actual fact, the audience engagement metrics that had been measured, i.e. reach, were exactly the wrong measurements. And that actually the right measurements were much more around a quality, a trust, and also for the brand to be able to advise the FMCG brands on how they should be speaking to the retailers. And in doing that, and in undertaking and understanding that nuance, it basically enabled the brand, the media brand, to position themselves as an absolute expert in the target audience that the brands were trying to reach. And so, and I know that that generated ROI within a week, because it just shifted and changed the conversation that they were able to have. So, audience engagement varies enormously, I think, depending on the brand that you're talking about and depending on the audience that you're talking about. So I don't think you can summarize it for any one brand in particular, or across the universe of brands. I think it's just massively nuanced depending on who it is you're talking about.
That is such a fantastic example. That it just, I kind of imagine, in a sense, it proves so much how important it is for a brand to know their audience inside out, to
Yeah.
know how to talk to them. That's the relevance, really.
Yeah.
It's the expertise, in a sense. It doesn't matter what you're measuring, it's about
No.
that piece first. And
100%.
oh, what a great example. And what are the hurdles in your experience? What do you think is stopping news brands from engaging better?
Fear of failure. I think,
Mhm.
for me, it's, people are in the news media industry have got such legacy products and such a competitive market, that I think that shifting away from the business models that work and doing anything that isn't incremental feels incredibly risky. And that's completely understandable, I think that having that cost pressure coming down on the top line as well means that news media can feel like it's on a spiral downwards in a way that other media or content type businesses don't so much. And so I think that really that's the like the main hurdle that stops news from experimenting more.
Yeah, no, I feel that every day speaking to our clients, that fear of failure, that fear of, even from the journalist's point of view, like what if it doesn't work? Is that, well,
Mm.
you could say it's a great thing, because then you'll know something more about your audience that you never knew before. Or but I totally feel that. And what
Mm.
strategies have proven most effective in engaging audiences in your experience?
So for me, I think we've just touched on it on the previous point. So for me, it is all about going back and understanding your audience. We can never understand our audiences well enough. We really can't. So I think that, for me, it's right at the start, understanding the nuances of your audience, understanding what they think and they believe in their own language, so that when you're creating your content or your go to market positioning, then you're replicating that back to them, so that the relationship between the brand and the customer, or the brand and the audience, is so interlinked that that brand equity rises and that engagement piece rises. And and the thing about where we've got to in terms of tech, and where we've got to in terms of measurement and reporting and personalization, means that the power that gives us is in understanding that audience even better, and being able to evolve products even better for those particular audience segments that are coming out.
Your responses are
Yeah.
absolutely fantastic. Could you share a successful initiative that significantly boosted audience engagement? And what did you think made it so successful?
No worries at all. So my example of this, I was thinking about this, and I'm going to talk about PA Media, where I was Chief Commercial Officer for a while. And I think that what we did there, one of my initiatives that I worked on, was a repositioning of the organisation. So when I joined, they talked about themselves as a business that provided media services and content for news media organisations. fine, but it was features and benefits led. It didn't actually talk about what they fundamentally cared about. And what I felt was, when I walked into that organisation, was that the purpose and passion that they had about being at the heart of the news and supporting all of those, incredible organisations that they support and are fundamental to, was just not being communicated. So actually, what could have been the hardest initiative or the hardest change program was actually relatively easy, because all I did was capture all of the passion and all of the purpose that was felt within the organisation. And we shifted the brand position to being one that was about being the news media organisation's greatest ally in an ever changing market. And as soon as we did that, coupled with a very big data project that we rolled out, but as soon as we did that and we actually started talking to all of our big customers and saying, this is what we stand for, we're with you, we're one of the people in your newsroom, then it basically completely shifted the dynamic in the relationship that we had with the customers. And all of a sudden, we went from being over the different side of the table from each other, arguing about a contract, to being people together in a fight against changing consumer behaviour and, and the pressure on the business models. And so for me, it was, so from a B2B audience engagement perspective, that no doubt had an impact on their audience engagement further down the line, was changing that conversation so that we could understand what mattered more to them and adapt our content and our product sets accordingly.
It sounds like so much of what you've said up until now is so focused on that idea of perception, but also the drive, like what is driving us and what's the perception that we're creating. And I feel like even towards even our audiences, it's something that happens so much. And I almost see it as a lot of people don't see the difference between what social media is and what the news media is. We're very clear on what that is, but that's a kind of a perception piece as well. They don't know the difference between the two, and we're not necessarily communicating that in the right way. But I guess one of my questions is also around, has there ever been a piece of like audience engagement that's particularly surprised you?
I think back in the day, I was running a media portfolio at Haymarket, which was really unsexy. It was practical caravan and practical motorhome, outdoor leisure, we called it. And I think that what I would talk about there was a sort of two-sided opportunity around perception around the audience that was different. And first of all, like with the magazines and the websites that were in existence, the perception was very much that that audience wouldn't really dig social media at all, and they would only consume media in a certain way, i.e. a very traditional manner. And actually that proved completely false. And, and this audience was a massive iPad using, app using, social media engaged audience, because I guess they had more time on their hands. And also when they were doing, the very thing that this subject matter was, i.e. caravanning and motorhoming, actually they were engaging with those bits of tech much more frequently than they might have been when they were at home. So you're creating that sort of ongoing audience engagement with the product at exactly the right time. And then I think on the other side, the other bit of audience engagement in the same product set when I was leading that portfolio was actually understanding and identifying that there was a whole swathe of audience that we weren't engaging through the brands because we were talking in exactly the wrong way, i.e. we were talking about caravans and motorhomes rather than talking about what people wanted to get from being in the caravans and motorhomes. So then I ended up driving a strategy, a much more of a digital led strategy that appealed to audience segments who were families with young children who wanted to get away from digital, and get their kids out in nature. There was a segment that was, outdoor sports enthusiasts. So these were people who might want to go paddleboarding or surfing or kayaking, and actually just wanted to, or hiking or whatever, and just wanted to facilitate that holiday as opposed to it being, I am a caravaner and identifying as such. So I think, again, it's that audiences always surprise you, and it always comes back to you understanding that audience properly rather than sitting in your ivory tower making assumptions about what your ideal product and channel strategy looks like.
I love that example. A digital strategy for people who want to leave digital. It works.
I know, exactly. You're right, actually. I've never looked at it like that, but it's yeah, that does sound mad, doesn't it? You know.
And at what point are you considering the audiences in this engagement piece? Like where do they
Right
sit?
from the very beginning.
Always.
You know, I think you've got to think about the audience at the very, very, very beginning. You know, for me, working up a product strategy starts with the strategy, right? It's, you know, strategy, then it's tech to facilitate the strategy, and then you need to understand the people who are going to run the strategy and the processes they need to follow. So at the beginning of that is that full strategy around what are the gaps in the market, what are you competing with, what sort of channels and what sort of content does that audience need, what are they currently getting, how therefore do you pull that strategy together. You know, I get the whole learn fast agile thinking, but you've got to base it on something in the first place. So the audience engagement and your intent for how you want the audience to interact with you has got to be there right from the beginning, or you haven't got a business model, right? You know, that's where it all comes from. That's the fountain.
Well, they are the customer, but I don't
Yeah.
think we necessarily consider them the customer, do we? Not always.
No.
I guess that leads on really well to my question of, if you had to rate what the importance of audience engagement, from 1 being the lowest to 10 being the highest, where would you kind of put that?
I don't even think there's any answer to that question other than 10, surely, because it literally is like, what do you have if you don't have audience engagement? And I'd just go back to how I was talking about, you know, my answer previously, and just saying that not all audience engagement is the same. So long as you are clear as to the size of the audience that you're after, the way that you want to engage with them, and the rate with which you expect them to engage with you, so long as you understand that and you've set it out, then you know it is the metric. It is the metric that is the proof point within success or failure. You know, you might be a brand that's actually a membership model that is looking for daily interaction and engagement with the brand. You might be a media owner who has got an event that is once a year, and you just want it to be the first thing on their diary once a year, and not really looking for much interaction in between. You know, like, the variations between what audience engagement means are so huge, but they are ultimately the indicator of how successful a product is, and the opportunity for development in the future. So it's the thing you should be setting out from the very beginning, monitoring and seeing where the opportunities and the threats come from constantly.
And part of all of that monitoring and doing is the technology that helps you to do that.
Yeah.
What role do you see technology like AI or data analytics play in these audience engagement efforts?
So, I mean, it's massively important. There's no two ways about it. But I think the key, and I'm the wrong person to ask to sort of go through the Rolodex of different types of tech to present it. I've luckily worked with some really smart people who can identify the right thing and the right platform, you know, to present information to people in the past. So I haven't had to do it myself. But the key thing for me is using the right platform and serving it to the people, the end users within the organization, in a way that is natural within their daily workflow. And then the other key thing is making sure it's actionable by them. So making sure that you are serving those people the right information at the right time in a natural way, in a voice and a language they can understand. So that might be, you know, using a data translation tool on top of the raw data so that you can actually provide an action for your team. Or it might be, you know, how I've worked with my commercial teams in the past is creating dashboards that are prominent when people go onto Salesforce. So they literally would be going about their daily sales and marketing business, opening it up, and they'd understand how their customers were interacting. So I think that the tech is an enabler. And then what is the most important thing is you putting the processes in place in a daily workflow to make sure that people are engaging with it and actually uniting around it, and that is a non-negotiable. For me, that's more important almost than the complexity around tech.
Yeah, I love that definition of tech being an enabler. I'm completely on the same page. So let's talk a little bit about the common pitfalls, the challenges, the mistakes that happen around. What, in your opinion, are some of those common pitfalls and challenges when it comes to audience engagement?
Lack of clarity, a lack of shared clarity is for me what is always at the root of things, of challenges. And I think that, I have a real bugbear, or I think that matrixed organizations are really challenged, because in this day and age, so many of the senior leaders have been cut from businesses that there are fewer people to actually connect the dots between all of the different departmental types. And so you're generally asking a senior sales leader or a senior marketing leader or a senior content leader to think beyond their personal daily targets. And I think that in order to adapt and evolve and respond to audience engagement data and insight that you're pulling out from what you're seeing day to day, or month to month, everybody really needs to come together to actually be able to analyze it properly. And so I think that, time is one of the key pitfalls, and process is one of the key pitfalls, because you have to make it. Sort of goes back to the question, my answer to the previous question, really, which is that the tech is an enabler for process. And I think the pitfall here is a lack of process and a lack of alignment. To me, that's the key thing, and valuing that audience engagement data as the central information point that actually guides your decision making process and the actions that you take within an organization.
And do you have any examples of times it hasn't worked as planned?
um I like to think, I hope that I haven't led a business unit in a way that has failed. But I've certainly, from a consulting perspective, I've observed businesses where they simply haven't had an agreement. I think it's that fundamental agreement. I think it's that fundamental, what's our strategy?
Mm.
How do we all contribute to that strategy? So I think it's almost where there hasn't been a commonality of goal and an understanding of what that means to you in your department and you as an individual. And these are all things that can be rectified by good communication, good leadership, HR being involved in terms of setting goals and, having performance reviews that are set around goals, and also an expectation around behaviors. It's not just hard metrics, but it's how we expect people within an organization to interact with each other.
Mm.
And the other piece, so I think there's that one piece on the side, and then the other piece where I've seen it fall down is just skills, where, genuinely, you've, with all the best will in the world, you haven't the investment in the right skills, to actually analyze data, to serve data in a way that's digestible, to, to action the data. It's just where companies haven't invested correctly in the right people and the right skills.
That lack of clarity resonates so much with me. I also, and you, there was a moment you said no leaders, or less leaders.
Yeah.
And I would almost argue we've gone into a world where, brands, instead of being like content brands, media brands, are almost becoming tech companies in their
Yeah.
own sense. And I don't think the leaders understand the tech enough. So it's almost like the CTOs in some cases have become the CEOs. And we all know CTOs aren't CEOs in the same
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And they can't make the decisions in the same way because they haven't got the overview. They understand the tech, but they don't necessarily always understand the whole aim. So I can't agree with you more on that
Yeah.
one.
And I like, and just to sort of, to expand on that even further, I think it's quite surprising how many organizations don't have an adequate strategy. I think, especially in legacy brands, it's not being reviewed enough and it's not being nurtured enough and placed in the center of an organization, or it's not being communicated enough. It's a really common mistake for senior leaders to discuss amongst themselves, and because they will have discussed it to the nth degree, they'll assume a level of knowledge within the working body of the business that just doesn't exist. And I think that, again, if you come back to that clear vision and that clear strategy, then everything else tends to fall into place. So, for me, that's just the leaders key aim in life is to make sure everybody understands how they move the dial and what the goals are.
The key aim in life. I love
Yes.
that. Their whole life needs to be about communicating these goals.
Exactly. It's true though.
It is true. And speaking of like what happens next, we've got this big future. We're in this awkward middle phase, I would say. Where do
Yeah.
you see the future of audience engagement heading in the next, I'm going to say 5 years, because 10 almost
Yeah.
feels like too much.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that acceleration, even faster and faster is all that there is. We can see that with the amount of focus, new experts in AI, application of AI in business. It feels like the tech is running at a faster pace than the human skills are running. And so I think that that creates an enormous challenge. And I think that that can create panic within businesses that perhaps is a little bit unnecessary. And I think that all businesses really need to do all businesses really need to do. It's not simple. I'm not making it simple or suggesting it is to any degree. But I think so long as you've got the clarity about what you want to achieve and you've got the underpinning understanding about the audience engagement that is required in order to hit those goals, then you can select tech that enables you to match and deliver that. But I think you're right in regards to how you were talking about that relationship with the CTO. I think that those skills, the tech skills and the data skills, if businesses don't already have a very senior data person who is listened to within the organization, then they're on the back foot. And I think it's the pairing of those people along with the head of content and the head of commercial actually putting a proper data strategy in place that allows both an understanding of audience need, audience engagement, and therefore being able to make predictions about the future. And then I think it's also from a customer perspective, there's so much more of an expectation around personalization, and that we need as businesses to really embrace understanding what those particular segments are, how they are interacting with products, what other product opportunities there might be. So I think from that customer perspective, there's that expectation of being spoken to in a different way, and that's only going to evolve and accelerate even further. And then within the businesses, we just simply need to be prepared with the right skills in place to be able to make very quick, agile decisions around the tech, the platform, and the way that we serve content to people as those decisions are put in front of us.
If you had to give one piece of advice to a brand that was focusing on their engagement strategies at the moment, what would your go-to piece of advice be?
Customer research. I think that that's the foundation of everything. I think that understanding what your customer wants, understanding how frequently they want it, and understanding how your brand can give them that is at the bottom of absolutely everything. Because from that, you're able to set your goals, you're able to set your strategy, and you're able to adapt your strategy with clarity.
Thank you so much for your time, Rachel.
No problem at all.
That
It's been
was
a pleasure.
fantastic.